Okay, folks, least but not last, and last but not least, Karl English, and he's going to talk about fish wheels and his experiences. Karl, take it away.
Thank you, Harvey. Thank you, gang. Thanks for the opportunity. I guess I'm on two different mics, so maybe I'll stay on one. Opportunity to talk with you guys and do this presentation on the Coquitlam traditional territories here in beautiful Coquitlam, BC. I have been doing a lot of work on fish wheels for a number of years now, dating back to about 92, and I'm going to give you a brief history. I can figure out the forward button is probably that one. Historical tour through where fish wheels have been operated throughout North America since their arrival from Europe. There's a pointer here too, right? Yeah, okay. So started off, first design of fish wheels known in North America is in the Roanoke River in North Carolina, close to the East Coast here. Those fish wheels came to the Columbia River around the time of the gold rush. I've got some pictures of these when you get to other slides. And then moved from the Columbia to the Yukon when the Yukon gold rush happened. And they were used in both cases to feed the miners. They seem to be an effective way of getting fish to feed people. And the guys operating the fish wheels, by the way, made more than the gold miners because they just ended up either getting killed or trading their gold for fish. Then from the Yukon, one design came down, very similar design to the Taku in northern BC. It's a transboundary river. And from there, one of the individuals who built those wheels went to Simon Fraser, and we hired him in '92 to build us some for the NAS and work with the Niska. And you'll see a bunch of those slides. The NAS fish wheel design evolved very quickly over the first couple of years. And a similar fish wheel was fished up on the Babine by the Gitsan. Then down to the Fraser with the Yale First Nation initially, and later with other groups, Matsqui. Stan Morgan was here earlier today, and he's one of the individuals we work with on the Matsqui First Nation side. From there, we've deployed fish wheels on the Copper with First Nations or tribal groups in Alaska, and then most recently up on the Susitna River as part of a major research effort. Almost all of these areas, fish wheels have been used for harvesting as well as research. Some of them more on the research and assessment side, some more harvesting. Here's a picture of the Roanoke fish wheel in 1829. It's the earliest, or a picture of one like would have been built in 1829. That's not, they didn't have a camera back then, so they couldn't take a picture. The Columbia River fish wheels operating from 1870 to 1935. This is an example of a very large structure, major pilings to be pounded in to produce these. Both the leads for these fish wheels and the size of them were phenomenal. This is back when timber was cheap and labor was cheaper, and you could build incredible structures for harvesting fish. These were all burnt down by the commercial fishermen in the early 1930s. I think the last one was operating in 1935. So it's been a while. As you can see, if you look at this one closely, you'll see it resembles very similarly that Roanoke fish wheel. This is an early fish wheel on the Yukon River, and the early ones on the Columbia also look like this, and this same pattern migrated north. And this is from about 1900, and they're still using these to some extent to this day on the Yukon, not specifically that design. This is one of the first wheels built on the Nass River. It was a similar design initially to what was used on the on the Yukon and Taku. They had wood baskets. We had a wood platform. This one actually is a combination wood and aluminum. It's a very efficient system. Focus, of course, live capture, low energy costs, high efficiency, high quality product, and was primarily being used to catch Chinook salmon for a radio telemetry study in 92 and 93 on the Nass River with the Niska. It evolved to a complete aluminum design here with baskets of aluminum, pontoons of aluminum, live tanks on each side that will hold up to 350 or so sockeye each. The decks where you can work on, you can see, if you look closely, the platforms back here and workstations for the crew so they can record information and tag fish and do all the things they have to do. Plus there's a boom along the base here, and this tower is used so you can raise the fish wheel out of the water when you want to move it from A to B to C. And you do have to move these things around during the year. In terms of the costs of operating fish wheels, in terms of labor and just keeping the system going through the year, obviously if you're going to catch a small number of fish, your profit margin is going to be lower. If you can catch larger numbers of fish, it goes up. And there's substantial numbers of fish being caught every year on the Nass. This is a cost-benefit ratio for the Nass fish wheel. Here's some numbers from back in 2000 with 4 fish wheels catching 25,000 sockeye with harvesting costs of about 115,000. These are being run for not 20 days, but for 3 months. The actual harvesting time might be shorter, might only be 6 weeks of that, but you're operating the fish wheels for the whole summer period for stock assessment and harvesting. It's got a pretty good cost to benefit ratio and lots of days of employment for people. Here's a picture of a similar wheel, a slightly different basket design. This is the one on the Babine that was used there for a number of years. Again, harvesting for both food, by First Nations for food and for commercial purposes. Here's a fish wheel on the Copper River in Alaska. And you can see it's the same basic design as the 3-basket fish wheel that was developed in the Nass. It's referred to, if you've ever seen the book called Fish Wheels of the Columbia. If you look in the back, in the appendix of that book, you'll see a wheel that's called the Swiftwater Fish Wheel. And it's a very balanced 3-basket design, which is designed to be used in swift water, where the Nass has got some really significantly swift water, less so on the Copper, but it does turn very nicely at low water velocities and at high water velocities, and a very effective process. Here's the smaller fish wheel. Those other ones are all about 12-foot baskets. This is an example of a 8-foot basket on a smaller platform, but on the Susitna River, where the water depths were not that great and the clarity was pretty good for fish wheel, it's a fairly turbid river, these 8-foot baskets catch fish really well. The Yale, so closer to home here, I'll give you some more details of what we've done with Yale First Nation and with the Matsqui group. This was a project back when we had the other selective fishing projects in the late 1990s. For 4 years there was a Selective Fishing Initiative. So 98 and 99, we worked with Yale to operate this fish wheel. Again, similar design to what it was. These have all been built by pontoons by an individual group up in Terrace, shipped down the components and assembled them on site on the Fraser. This is up near, just below Lady Franklin Rock, for those that know the Lower Fraser, or just at the Yale area. This is the Matsqui fish wheel. Next, the large fish wheel, currently the largest fish wheel in the world. It still exists and has been used a number of years since 2008. And you can see the size of it compared to the NAS one in behind. The baskets for the large one are almost 20 feet in depth, so it's about a 40-foot Ferris wheel. Some different technology had to be figured out for how to raise that wheel. You can see that there's a triangular aluminum, 6x6 aluminum pieces here, and we pull it up by pulling essentially the tower over using power winches on the back. This is quite a hefty, even with aluminum, it's quite a hefty object. It's not going to be cranked up by the hand winch. But you need to have a bigger fish wheel, as we found out that the water clarity was not as poor in the Fraser as it is on the Nass, and so the fish can avoid your fish wheel if you don't have very large baskets. You'll see in a minute that this thing actually does work. The other things you have to consider in the design are the fact that you'll have debris coming down, and some pretty significant debris. The location here is right below an active logging show just upstream. There's logs that are sometimes get away from the barges and things that are towing them up and down the river. I've been there when we've had to do a bunch of bulldogging on logs to keep them from going and eating into the fish wheel, and sometimes have to just haul the stuff out of the water because you're going to get some big stuff, even with a protection boom. This is called a swifter boom. We drove these pilings here initially, and this, so you can see the boom outside trying to protect the wheel from floating debris. The booms last a lot longer than the pilings. This is an area where there's a fair amount of current, and I think we have one piling left now out of the 7 that was originally driven in this location. These were steel pilings, 80 feet long, going 50 feet into the bottom, and they still were knocked over by the current. We didn't have ice those years either. It would have been a different thing this year. But we have a structure here along shore. This is a weir floating platform, keeps the smaller fish wheels. So there's 2 fish wheels operated here, the 10-foot basket one and the 20-foot basket one, fishing the sloping shoreline going down, and have a weir so that the fish can't come up on the inside of you. This is a picture of pink salmon selective harvest operation that was operated in 2011 during late August, early September, and we were sliding the fish. We structured the fish wheel so it had one-way slide, so all the fish went one side. And this is one more click, and then you have to hit the screen. Oh, page up. Okay. All right. This is the fish wheel turning. Large fish wheel. You have the crew back here on a herring skiff with the totes, and as usually catch more fish in a lot of places at night, but during the peak of the pink run, you catch fish all day long. And this is a load of about 8 fish or so being caught in a basket, going down the one-way slide across a little sluice there and right into a tote on the boat. The other person there, you'll see in a minute, was monitoring the catch for any bycatch. And while these fish are being caught, he's identified a fish in the previous bunch that he wants to have this guy look at because he knows the species. That's Dwayne. And Dwayne's going to look and tell him that, nope, that's not a pink salmon, so you got to release that one. And so he'll go and release that while the fish wheel continues to turn and catch more fish. on so I can click on to the next graph. This shows you the numbers. So when the fish wheel was operating there, earlier in August, we were doing monitoring for other species. So it was catching very few pinks, mostly sockeye during this period. And then when we came to the point where we wanted to start looking at the harvest, we knew that it wouldn't be economical to have a fishery until we were getting between 250 and 300 fish an hour. And so that's when the commercial fishing started up in early September. And you can see these are hourly catch rates, so over 500 in that first day. Wasn't working a lot of hours, but then through this period we were 300 to 400 fish an hour. We had periods when we were catching more than 1,000 fish in an hour. That herring skiff with 4 totes could handle 1,000 fish in one load, and then you had to replace it. And at some points you were doing that every hour. Oops, wrong button. This is the catches for that short period of time. I think it was about a 10 or 11 day fishing effort. 2 really important things here. We're catching pink salmon, so you got to catch a lot of pink salmon because the value of them is much lower than it is for sockeye or Chinook or coho. But you can also see that even with a selective gear, you're saving these fish, but it is virtually all pink salmon that's out there that you're catching. So there's not a huge number of other species being caught. And that's for 2 reasons. It's not like this is the ratio of these fish in the entire river. That the pink salmon, when they're migrating in big numbers, displace a lot of the other fish offshore. And the pink salmon are less strong swimmers, so they're going to be more closely oriented with shore. And so your catch ratio is much higher in the fish wheel than it would be if you threw a gill net out in the middle of the channel, and you'd catch more sockeye for sure. You'd catch probably more Chinook and coho, and then these other species are pretty low in numbers anyway. The harvesting, it has been used in the NAS for extensively for the sockeye harvesting, as you saw in the other graph, but also for Chinook, and extensively for biosampling, tagging, and recapture work. Here's a picture of some of the selective harvesting being done on the Nass River fish wheels, again transferring to totes, and this gets processed right in the community in New Ange. Some Chinook salmon that we were originally designed the fish wheels for was to capture these big Chinook. The ones on the Nass, because it's very turbid water, we catch the full spectrum of migrating salmon, where on the Fraser you don't catch as many Chinook because and bigger fish avoid the fish wheels much more easily than smaller fish because they're faster swimmers. But on the Nass, you can see you can catch some pretty good sized Chinook. We have done telemetry studies extensively on the Nass and other rivers, the Fraser, and looked at survivorship of fish tagged. This is one from the 92 and 93, extensive radio telemetry work on the Nass. You can see the tangle net work initially, because we started tangle netting before we had the fish wheels in operation in 92. We got concerned that we weren't catching enough fish. That's why we built the fish wheels in the first place. And it had slightly lower survivorship compared to the fish wheel caught fish, which were very close to 100%. And this is tracking them right from the lower Nass right to the spawning grounds. And we were tracking all the populations because we were flying the entire drainage and had stations throughout. The Kitsakalum River there, we were tagging using angling and tracking fish in 95. At Kitsakalum, Chinook are on the Skeena River. On the Fraser again, this is a picture of a coho being sampled and released by the Yale First Nation. It's probably only seconds away from being in the water. She's just about lost control of this fish. Sturgeon, yeah, we've got sturgeon in these wheels. We can caught them up to 8 feet in length in the live tanks, and that takes a bit of work to haul a 250 or 300 pound sturgeon out of a fish wheel. And steelhead. This is a, I don't know whether it's a Thompson River or a Chilcotin steelhead, but it's one that was caught at Yale in 1998 when there were still some around. And it was radio tagged and released in that year, and there was some other areas where we were radio tagging and doing work with Rob Bison on steelhead. Here's the catches, give you an idea of what catches were like at Yale. I put this up largely because this year there's planned to be some more operation of fish wheels from early September or maybe mid-September through October, similar to what was done in 1998, now more than 20 years ago. So we're going back to the future again. And again, the sockeye dominate early in this process, and then the run largely over by the end of September. And then you start to see the other fish, and you break down the other fish numbers. You can see there's a good number of coho, fair number of steelhead caught, and a scattering of Chinook. And then later in the timing period, you get the chum that are going up through the Yale area. These are the actual numbers, what were caught in that particular year. And some of the nuts and bolts about what's important about operating a fish wheel. The key thing is picking the site, like it is for traps, and almost everything we do in fisheries is all site related. If you're angling, you got to go to the right site. If you're gill net fishing, you got to go to the right site. Fish wheels are no different. They just have some very specific characteristics, and water depth similar to whatever type of fish wheel you have. So you want to be fishing as close to the bottom because the fish migrate up definitely close to the bottom when they're in these higher flow areas. So you need good water velocities close to shore to both turn the fish wheel, but also even higher velocities offshore to persuade the fish to go up along the shore because they're searching for those lower velocity areas. If you're going to do harvesting, you want to be close to a site where you can offload your catch because these totes of 1,000 or 250 pink salmon in a tote is not something you want to be huffing by hand in places. So you want to be where you can offload it. You got to assess at these sites where the fish are migrating, and that can be done with sonar systems like Eris and Ditson type sonar. Works really well to figure out how the fish are migrating in the area you're going to put these. It's also really helpful for the economic side to talk with the managers in the area to make sure that if there is an interest for stock assessment work, these are a great platform for live tagging and doing work, so you get that factor. That's really what started the NISCA program and keeps it running every year for 28 years of work up in the NAS. And we'll keep it running in perpetuity is the combination of both harvesting and stock assessment. Obviously selecting the design, securing the funding partners, and implementing every year and improving as you go. We had a discussion earlier about value added. The nice thing about these, like out of your pound traps and other types of gear that don't have net marks, you have a very high quality product. These are a couple of pink salmon caught in the Lower Fraser, pretty much silver bright, no net mark fish, and the person marketing these was getting significantly more than the average price for the pink salmon in this year. So you can do some specialty marketing as well. You got to be prepared to move, change things, adjust things as the year goes by. So the Fraser River freshet is in either late May or early June, And from there, the water levels change dramatically. You can have 10, 15 feet more in the canyon, sometimes as much as 20 or more feet of water level change. So you really have to know your site, have alternative sites. You can move these things around. It's a little easier to move these than a pound trap, so, but it still requires the ability to tow a pretty substantial object in fairly fast current. But they do move upriver well. We moved the Yale Fishwheel from the Hatzic area a year and a bit ago and drove it up the Fraser River all the way, towing it to Yale through all the different challenging spots. So you can move these things a fair distance if you've got the right horsepower. And then deploying guide nets if you need to. Here's an example at the Matsqui site where we've got a seine net stretched out. We were noticing from sonar systems we put below that the fish were avoiding at certain times, and they'd swim up and then they'd sense that there was something going on upstream, and then they'd move outside the wheel. So we put this guide net on the outside, and the fish would bump into that and then come back into the wheel and get caught. The other important thing for fish health is these slides were padded because if fish get hung up at all in the mesh, they can drop a fair distance down as the fish wheel turns. And they flap pretty hard, and they don't like to be out of water, or something about fish and being out of water. And so they're struggling a bit as they come through here. So you pad this so that they don't knock themselves out or damage themselves. But then you also catch sturgeon. So if you just put other padding on there, the sturgeon will tear it all up with their scutes. So you have to put a surface on top that's tough enough to handle a sturgeon scute on the Fraser. So things you learn over time. But they are effective technology. There's 6 of them operating annually on the NAS. And 3 of them here you can see, if you can see them on this side, one on this side up there, another one there and here. Very productive gear, especially in canyon areas like this on the NAS. And they've been operating there for, they say, 28 years. And with that, I can answer any questions if you have them regarding fish wheels. Got some microphones.
Carl?
Yes. Right.
Just asking about the 4-year program you had back in the 99s there. What happened to that program and sort of why didn't it continue?
Yeah, so I was thinking that would be a good question, because the issue here is sustainability and the difference between what had happened on the Fraser in those 4 years with the selective fishing program and what we see on the NAS that started earlier and is still going on today is the commitment to continue the use of fish wheels. And the selective fishing program ran for 4 years, then ended funding-wise, and nothing was there to keep it going. There was no shepherding of it, no working with the First Nations that had taken the plunge into using fish wheels and say, yeah, we want to see this continue. So make it part of your AFS agreement, make it part of your AROM agreement. And without that shepherding and leadership from both First Nations, it's too bad more of them couldn't be here today, and government, then these things just go for a period of time and then stop. Whereas you see it in the NAS, the government fully supports it. They have a treaty that provides funding to make sure these things happen. They have incentive. They've got to do stock assessment. So it's not just happening for the last 28 years. It's going to go on in perpetuity because of that level of commitment.
Yeah, great presentation, Carl. Thanks. Just wondering about the stock assessment virtues of the stuff on the NAS. I mean, is it just a snapshot, or is this information you can kind of extrapolate across the whole river?
No, it's covered. We basically do mark recapture. So the fish are tagged, each of the 4 major species. So Sockeye, for major and economically valuable, Sockeye, Chinook, coho, and steelhead are tagged every year out of the fish wheels in Gitwan Silk, which is a lower part of the, it's the first canyon on the Nass River, and then recaptured in one of those 3 or 4 fish wheels in Grease Harbor Canyon, which is about 15 kilometers further upriver, and then again up at Mesiadin Fishway. So you get a lot of recapture information. That's used to come up with estimates of efficiency of the wheels and reconstruct the entire run of those 4 species going by the Gitwan Silk fish wheels. And then for pink and chum, they just use an index of abundance. They're not as abundant in the Nass as these other species, and they're not a major focus for the fishery. So pink and chum are assessed differently. But they also do tagging of lamprey and market capture for lamprey, because we do have a fairly good size return of lamprey to the Nass.
Karl, on your larger fish wheel, 20-foot unit that you had,
Yeah.
with the bulkhead that you'd established with pilings upriver, what was your capital cost for that particular operation?
Yeah, so that, the large fish wheel itself costs similar to what you guys were talking about for pound nest. It's about $100,000 to build that fish wheel because of the aluminum and stuff. Fortunately, it lasts a long time and is still around now more than 10 years later. The pilings didn't last as long, so we spent $35,000 driving pilings, thinking we needed them to protect the wheel and use it to hook things up. And we had a big freshet in 2008, and I think we lost 4 of the 7 pilings in that high water, and then the other ones have just worked themselves loose and fallen over since. So we don't rely on those pilings anymore. We use a swifter boom, which doesn't need them. The shoreline abutment was about $25,000 to put together that weir, and it's a steel and aluminum weir system, which is also still operational today. But yeah, and then the small fish wheel that's inside the big one today would cost about $40,000 to build from scratch. We're bringing a bunch of fish wheel components down from our Susitna project. So we have a bunch of components that could be used to deploy more wheels on the Fraser in 2019 or 20, whatever, because the Susitna project ended about 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. Oh, there's
Thank you
Rob.
Oh, sorry.
Just one bit of a tangent maybe, but do you ever get any of those tag steelhead recovered in the upstream tributaries on the Nass?
The radio tags or the...
Well, whatever marks you're putting on them on the wheels.
Okay, yeah, so, I was talking to Trina about the fact that did a major telemetry study last year with Sockeye and looked at the distribution of Sockeye amongst the whole watershed. We have done telemetry studies on Chinook, as mentioned, and they do sampling for they put spaghetti tags or these Ketchum operculum tags on Chinook, and we have a fence on the Quinigee system, and it has a video. It's a video weir, so you can see the fish going through, and you put the tag on the right side of the fish because your camera's on that side, and you can read the tag as it goes through the video weir because it's clear water. So we get tag recoveries for Chinook from Mesiadin, from the Quinigees. We do dead pitch on Damdichaks and some other systems. But most of the sockeye recoveries come from either the in-river fisheries, and by the way, there are substantial in-river fisheries every year for food for First Nations, so you get lots of tag recoveries from those, as well as the fishway at Mesiadin.
Okay, I'm curious, like, in terms of the Clearwater steelhead tributaries of the Nass, there's really only a couple. Quinigees, there's not very many fish in it, but Damdichaks gets a lot of effort up there now compared to what it did years ago, and so does the adjacent main stem now. So are there tag recoveries from steelhead up there?
Yeah, well, most of the tag recoveries are on the Cranberry. That's the place where we get most of the mark rate information for steelhead on. And then we've gone out with other anglers. We have what you guys used to refer to as the human gill net in Niska form. Stephen Kingshot, who really is a superb angler, and send him out with a crew, and they come back with 40 or 50 recoveries for steelhead for the program. So,
Over what sort of time period?
well, those guys can go out for I went out with them one day, and we got 40 fish in 8 hours of fishing in the Cranberry. But it depends, some days you might do less, some days you might do more, depending on whether you find the spot where they're hanging out. But
You were not fishing with single barbless hook, artificial lure only.
it was single barbless hook, yeah,
Yeah.
but it wasn't artificial. It was roe, drifting roe. Yeah, they were pretty attracted to it.
We're getting into the realm of fishing stories.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Scott.